The Battle of Stalingrad inflicted unprecedented damage on the military might of Nazi Germany. As a result of this battle, the Wehrmacht lost 20 full-fledged divisions out of 172 that were fighting on the Eastern Front. The scale of these losses turned out to be so significant that the German army did not experience such a level of defeats either before or after, until the final surrender in May 1945. Although Soviet military historiography often mentioned the destruction of dozens of German divisions in subsequent operations, these figures should be considered exaggerated. The key difference was that Wehrmacht divisions that were surrounded in other battles usually had the opportunity to restore their combat capability by recruiting personnel and continuing to participate in combat operations. However, the fate of the army under the command of Field Marshal Paulus turned out to be completely different. These divisions were completely destroyed, leaving not even a backbone for subsequent reconstruction. How many Germans were captured? The exact number of German soldiers who were surrounded at Stalingrad remains a matter of debate among historians. Estimates range from 80,000 to 330,000 people, although there are higher numbers that most researchers consider unlikely. Several factors explain the difficulty in establishing accurate data. The encircled German units deliberately overestimated the number of personnel in order to receive more provisions and military equipment via the supply air bridge. The situation was complicated by the presence in the boiler of military personnel from allied German countries: Romanians, Hungarians, Croats, and Italians, as well as auxiliary units from Hy-Vee and employees of the Todt Engineering and Construction Organization. In addition, between 45 and 80,000 wounded were evacuated by air during the battle. According to official Soviet documents, 91,545 German soldiers surrendered and were captured in the Stalingrad pocket. Among them, 2,500 officers, 23 generals, and 1 field marshal. These figures became the official statistics of the Soviet side. According to West German historiography, the number of German prisoners of war captured in the Battle of Stalingrad was about 108,000. However, the subsequent fate of these prisoners is causing intense debate in the historical community. Johann Althaus, a journalist with the reputable Die Welt newspaper, cites shocking statistics. Only 5,000 to 6,000 prisoners subsequently returned alive to Germany and Austria. Military historian Rüdiger Overmans, a recognized expert on the study of losses in World War II, notes that the mass extermination of prisoners of war was not a deliberate policy of the Soviet Union. Nevertheless, a legitimate question arises about the causes of such a high mortality rate, about 95% among the prisoners of the Stalingrad pocket. It is important to keep in mind that a significant number of German prisoners of war have returned to the German Democratic Republic, which is often overlooked in the calculations. Despite this, the death rate among the prisoners of the Paulus army was indeed unprecedentedly high, although there are objective reasons for such statistics. The hunger of the Germans. The problem of catastrophic malnutrition in the ranks of the Sixth Army arose long before the moment of its surrender. For months, German soldiers subsisted on extremely meager rations. By the time of the encirclement, all the possibilities of requisitioning food from the local population had been completely exhausted, and the horse stock was consumed. Medical examinations showed that by the time they were captured, about 70% of German soldiers were already suffering from dystrophy. The situation was aggravated by the fact that it was not possible to provide adequate nutrition in Soviet prisoner of war camps. The Red Army itself was experiencing an acute shortage of food. According to the observations of German journalist Johann Althaus, the situation was complicated by the fact that even Soviet soldiers who were on guard duty in prisoner of war camps faced the problem of insufficient supplies. As a result, some of the already limited food supplies intended for prisoners were misused. Cold. The harsh climate of Stalingrad, with its sharply continental character, created extreme conditions for survival. During the frosty winters, aggravated by biting winds, the cold became especially relentless, penetrating through any protection. The Sixth Army of the Wehrmacht turned out to be catastrophically unprepared for such weather conditions. The acute shortage of winter uniforms, especially warm cotton pads, led to desperate attempts by soldiers to protect themselves from the cold with improvised means. Historical photographs widely distributed around the world captured German prisoners of war trying to keep warm with the help of women's scarves, and various rags. In addition to the harsh weather conditions, the prisoners faced massive outbreaks of dangerous diseases. Typhoid fever and dysentery claimed the lives of soldiers every day. The situation of wounded prisoners of war, whose chances of recovery in such extreme conditions were minimal, was especially difficult. The psychological state of the prisoners also played a fatal role. Before the surrender, the soldiers of Paulus's army were supported by the hope of a possible breakthrough, which helped to mobilize the last forces of the body. After losing this hope, many fell into deep apathy, having lost the will to survive. The conditions of detention of prisoners of war were extremely difficult. Temporary camps organized in Beketovka and Krasnoarmeysk, modern districts of Volgograd, were located in villages abandoned by residents, fenced off. The rooms were not heated, and they were often devoid of windows and doors. Transportation to permanent camps was carried out in unheated wagons, while meals were extremely scarce and irregular. The combination of these factors, illness, psychological exhaustion, and harsh conditions of detention, led to a high mortality rate among prisoners of war of the Battle of Stalingrad. From a historical perspective, the treatment of German prisoners of war in the USSR can be described as relatively humane, especially in comparison with the way Soviet prisoners of war were held in German captivity. Most of the German soldiers captured on various fronts were able to return to their homeland after completing reconstruction work in the post-war period. However, the situation with the prisoners of war of the Battle of Stalingrad became a tragic exception from the overall picture. The winter of 1942 to 1943 created harsh conditions of natural selection. Only the most physically and mentally strong soldiers survived. During this critical period, the Red Army, experiencing an acute shortage of resources, was unable to provide proper care for the prisoners. The situation was aggravated by the fact that the Soviet troops themselves suffered from shortages of food and basic necessities. Significant improvements in the situation of German prisoners of war occurred only in the summer of 1943, when the supply system was properly established. From that moment on, the death rate among prisoners decreased significantly, almost disappearing. This demonstrates that the high mortality rate among the prisoners of Stalingrad was mainly due to the extraordinary circumstances of the winter of 1942 to 1943, rather than a purposeful policy. Friends, subscribe to the channel, share this video with your friends, and write comments. See you in new videos.